PTL just did their all-pro team, which is effectively an all-star team where they pick the best player in each role or the most impactful, or I honestly don't really know what their criteria is. This is something that I actually get a lot of questions for, so I'm going to do it for LPL. I might do something similar written-wise for EULCS just because I've done that before. But I really wanted to be able to hash out in a more conversational way how I rank players and why I rank them a certain way, especially in relation to LPL, because this is what I talk about more often. I'm going to do it now. I feel pretty safe doing it before finals, because even if finals happens and one of the players that I pick as best in their role just goes 0-15 every single game, I don't expect it to go 5 games if there's a player going 0-15, but let's say for 5 games, then I'm not going to look at that and say, like, holistically that player is really, really bad. I might rank them, like, down a bit if it's really close, and a lot of these are really close, so maybe that matters, but I don't think it's going to matter, and I don't think we're going to have a situation where I do pick a player and they go 0-15 every single game they play. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and give you the criteria first of all. One thing that I value really highly is well-roundedness. I actually find that well-roundedness of a player, I tend to value it more than other people, more than some of my peers, because if I look at a player who only plays like carry champions and carries every game, but then plays tanks in an instance where maybe he has another player on his team who can carry really well, and is more suited to that role, and so he plays tanks and then he just feeds relentlessly or doesn't do as well, then I will tend to rate that player lower. Consistency, again, it's kind of similar, it's just that they're able to more often than not have a positive impact on the game and not have a negative impact on the game. They don't have there's not a case where they have these really, really, really high highs and then these really, really abysmal lows. I don't tend to value those types of players as much. The next criteria that I look at is, of course, like the carry, right? How many times can you look at a player's individual performance and say, you know, they won the game off that? I think that's actually really rare at a certain level where a team player is really, really, really high up. So this isn't going to be something that is going to happen very often. And of course, last of all, like the sort of results you have, like the numbers you put up, how well your team did. I use this as like sort of the last baseline. So if you have someone who's really, really good in all those areas, but then they're on like an 8th place team versus a 2nd place team, you have to give it to the 2nd place team player, unfortunately, for that guy. So let's start with the top lane. Top lane was actually really complicated for me because I actually saw an instance where we had a clear top 3, but those top 3 were really, really hard to sort between. And then after that we had, I guess, kind of a clear 4th place, I think. And then there was like a question mark between the 5th and 6th place. So first of all, I'm going to start with the 5th place and explain why I picked Invictus Gaming's Zatai. So the reason why I picked Invictus Gaming's Zatai is because I think that he's really high up on the carry factor, because I felt like for a lot of this summer season, Invictus Gaming's Rookie and Cacao, especially in the second half, which I'm going to rate more highly because I actually have done player rankings for the first half, so it makes more sense to more heavily weight the second half for this video. I'm going to give 5th place to Zatai because when Cacao and Rookie just felt like they didn't care overall, they played really passively, they just sort of farmed and they just let the enemy team like take all these advantages for free. I felt like Zatai always tried to have some sort of impact, and he was always really trying to pull pressure in his lane, and I felt like he ended up being a very, very high pressure type player, kind of akin to like Insect on KTB or, you know, Darien on Moscow 5. You know, Zatai had that style, and eventually like just going at it and keep progressing with it, you saw him play these like really monster like split push type top laners. But overall, like, I don't think his well-roundedness is as high as some of the other ones, and his consistency isn't like as high. But I actually think his consistency ended up being very, very high towards the second half, where he would always have like some kind of positive impact. And I didn't really see an instance ever where he was the reason why Invictus Gaming lost. More often than not, you know, he would put up a full effort and he would have some kind of positive impact. And then, so the other person I was kind of debating is Long, but of course, like, Long I feel had a very similar issue with Zatai, except I think he was less consistent, and of course, UP didn't finish very well. Then, of course, after 5th place, we have Flandra at 4th. Flandra, I thought, was really, really good at the carry type style, but again, he's kind of one-dimensional in the sense where he's really, really good at carry champions. He does play tank champions fairly well. Like, I think he's really good on Gnar. He's played enough Maokai where he can play it well, but he's just never going to be as good on those champions as he is on, like, Fizz or Riven or even, like, crazy shit like Azir Top. So for me, Flandra, just like the 1v1, really solid. Sometimes he goes too deep. I don't see him as well rounded, but he's like definitely high up on that third criteria of carry. You know, just he straight carries a lot of games when he has a really, really good game. Now, 3rd place we have. This was really, really difficult for me, so I'm just going to lay out all the top 3 top laners that I thought were top 3. I actually picked Acorn, Flame, and Korra 1. This was really hard because none of these players played like the entire split, right? So you have Korra 1. Since I weighted the second half more highly, Korra 1 played like for most of the second half, right? So you can look at his play like on a larger scale. Flame and Acorn switched off a lot. Flame played the least. So, and then of course Acorn had that period where he wasn't super at super good form because he was splitting his time between teaching and playing. So I actually think that, and all these players actually ended up having similar style, where they can play a lot of different things that have high consistency, and they usually have a good positive impact. I think that Acorn was sort of lower on the positive impact scale just because he wasn't as in form as the other two during the second half of the split, and so I give him the 3rd place. And then I give Flame 2nd because I think that, again, he just like didn't put up the game, so it's really, really hard to gauge him, but I think that if he had played as much as Korra, we would see like the same overarching level of consistency, like the same number of games played. So for me, like Flame and Korra are the definitive number 1, but because like Korra played more games in the second half, I give it to Korra. And of course, like this last series, Korra 1 didn't play well, but Flame didn't play at all, so kind of really hard to rate them there. That's where I have it. 1st place Korra, 2nd place Flame, 3rd place Acorn, 4th place Flandra, and 5th place Zatai. Now, moving on to junglers. This one actually I found was the position that was supposed to be the most promising and have the most talent in, but ended up being like I was scraping a little bit to get the 5th one. 5th came down to me between Condi, MLXG, and World 6. I ended up disqualifying World 6 just because I think World 6 is actually really dependent on Mata and also really dependent on Gragas. So for me, he doesn't really get like individual impact isn't as high, especially if he's not on his best champion. So he doesn't meet the well-roundedness criteria. So he was eliminated. MLXG, I thought, was also not super well-rounded. He played carry junglers much, much better than the others, so he was like high up on the carry scale, but his consistency was so bad and his well-roundedness was so bad. For me, Condi, he was like the highest kill participation player the entire split in any role doing anything, and then M3 was like really, really, really inflated, and I thought it was mostly on his back because he was able to have like this really high jungle pressure to keep the game going to the point where Dade could just go off in teamfights. So for me, Condi was like an extremely underrated jungler, and he had like really good performances. Unfortunately, M3 as a team just weren't together. They weren't very good. They just really relied on that Condi Dade situation, and so when it didn't go off, it didn't do well, and they had no actual macro strategy. So just M3 as a team was terrible. After Condi, I have Swift. I actually think Swift is a little bit overrated individually. It's unfortunate that Dandy didn't play jungle this season because he would be better than Swift. But Swift, again, he has this issue with going over in on engages and all this other stuff. I also don't think he's well-rounded. I don't think he plays like Rek'Sai very well. His consistency is questionable, but he's really, really good at like this early pathing strategy, especially when he gets his right champions. And so he's really smart jungle in that sense. And he will always have like this really high mechanical level, and the thing about his team is that they're able to play around that really well, so he looks even better. So that's why I have Swift at number 4. Number 3 is Kakao, and if you definitely look at immediacy, like Kakao had an amazing last series, right? But even in playoffs, he was like 50-50. I think for most of the summer season, he was 50-50. Sometimes he just didn't do anything, to be honest. But when he did like hit those highs, he was really, really good. Like he was better than like Clearlove or Spirit when he hit those highs. So consistency hits him really hard, but he played so many different champions. He was extremely well rounded. Um, and he could have like these carry performances sometimes. So Kakao I put in third. Spirit ended up being second for me because I think that for the first half of the split, Spirit was definitely the best. He carried really hard. Sometimes he wasn't as good on Nunu, but just like his performances consistently on other champions, like definitely, or Sejuani definitely overcame that. He just like seemed to be everywhere all the time. He was really, really good. His shot calling was sometimes questionable, but he was really good. But like at the second half, he just kind of didn't seem to care as much, lost some of that will to live, kind of like Kakao and Rookie, and he just flagged a little bit, was much less consistent, didn't have as many of those like really high level performances as he did in the first half. So that's why I give first place to Clearlove. Even in these last series, I think his jungle play in terms of his early game impact was really good. He had a lot of lane pressure, he ganked a lot, but then in his team fighting, he just, which like is usually his strong suit, right? He would just go in. So overall, as a jungle, Clearlove was really, really good as well. I think he didn't play as many of those like carry style champions. I think he's the kind of jungler who can play them if he practices them. And we did see him come out with the Echo in the end, and it was pretty good. And he's played Nidalee a little bit, but he just doesn't play those champions as much. So that's my one caveat with him, really. And hopefully EDG gets it together so that like he really shines and looks good again. Him and Koro as well. No, mid lane. Mid lane is a little bit of a controversy. I think mid lane, like top kind of, had a very clear like top four. Top four is extremely debatable. Like I think these guys were really, really close at the split, and it's like splitting hairs on what I value personally and criteria in terms of how I ranked them. But then when you get down from top four, like there are three that are really close for the fifth spot. And the three that were really close for this fifth spot are Dade, Cool, and Doinby. I ended up saying Dade just wasn't consistent enough. Cool, I actually felt the same way about Cool, but when I looked at his stats, like he didn't really die as much as because it felt like every time I looked at him, he was just feeding or something. But he actually had the second least amount of deaths per game of mids outside, so Pawn being the first, so that was really interesting, and it caused me to like look at some of his play again. The problem was his champion pool, all this other things, so I did end up eliminating Cool from top 5 and taking Doinby because even though I think Doinby has a very specific chemistry that works with his team, he's extremely well-rounded, plays a ridiculous variety of champions, like he's the largest variety of champions of any mid laner, like the tanks. He plays support style champions, he plays assassins, and he plays like the standard mages. So very huge champion pool. He's actually the most consistent of the three that I picked as well, and I think sometimes like where he kind of falls down below Dada and Cool is I don't feel like he has as much of the carry style, right? So he more supplements what everyone else does and doesn't necessarily straight carry games. And there have been games where he'll get a lot of gold and a lot of kills and a lot of resources, and he won't carry. So that would be my issue with Doinby and why he's number 5. Pawn is number 4. And this is the thing that will get me in trouble a lot. I'm sorry, the camera is shaking because for some reason my house shakes sometimes. I think it's the laundry. Yeah, I rated Pawn number 4. Pawn number 4 is really shocking to some people, but I just feel like his level isn't consistent. He's one of those flashy players where I rate consistency over carry, and I don't even think he fits the carry that well. Like his biggest thing is well-roundedness, because he will play a wide variety of things and he'll do it really, really well. Okay. And I do think that his positive impact does lead to wins a lot, just even if it's a smaller impact than some of the other players on his team. So he does get points in the carry, but just for me, it's like the consistency. Some games he'll look like a god, and some games he won't. He'll die a lot more, or he'll just fail to have an impact on the game. And I think that again goes back to his style. His style is inherently inconsistent. So he'll have these crazy performances where he's just above because he'll go for these plays, but he'll also just sometimes tank and lose everything because he is much more willing to take risks than a lot of mids. So number 3 is probably the biggest debate is Pawn versus Yu. I actually end up rating Yu over Pawn, and again, it's because of consistency. I think Yu is actually not as good in laning, so he won't trade as well. He usually at least gets like some small farm advantage, but he doesn't pressure his lane as much as I think he could. I think he's steadily gotten better at this, especially compared to last year in terms of pressuring and roaming and that sort of thing, but he's still, his trump card is going to be like the almost Dade style where 10k gold down, I can have the perfect ultimate, I can carry the game this way. And I think that is extremely undervalued because Yu isn't a flashy player. He's not going to do the crazy play all the time, though sometimes he will get the solo kills. Sometimes he will have the great assassin plays. Like, I think his Ari in the LGD versus Snake set, like, all the attention went to the Riven, but he had so many good charms and so many good setups. So sometimes he can do the flashy stuff, but I think he's just much more, he's super consistent. He is the trump card of Snake. He will get those teamfight ultimates to force them to win at the end, so that's why I have Yu as number 3. Number 2 and number 1 were extremely close this split, and I think that first half was definitely Rookie, and if Rookie had maintained his same level, I think he would have been number 1 for the entire split, but again, he just like kind of flagged and stopped caring as much. Godfrey and Rookie, very similar in terms of the wide variety of pressure they're able to apply, like the insane amount of assassins and mage champions that they're able to play that are just like so bannable. I think that where Rookie can make like more, they both make like the crazy plays work, and they'll both go for the crazy plays, but I think that Godby has more of a support structure for that to succeed than Rookie does, so he's encouraged to do that more, and it succeeds more often. I will say that both of them have very niche positions where Rookie has to win to carry his team, and I would say I think this is less true now, and it was less true in the series against EGG, but it was very much the case for most of the year. Godby is number 1 for me because I think the amount of map pressure and the warding and what he does with his leads is very unique. Like, he'll go and he'll get a lead in lane and he'll immediately ward the jungle for TBQ, or he'll get a huge advantage in gold from farming camps and just like monster the lane or go do a gank, and then he's just very good at using like gaps in minion waves and pressuring leads so well. I do think that he needs to have more champions where he can just go off and go crazy on, and I think Rookie might actually be better in that aspect, but Godby almost has like a full menu of bans of champions that he can do that on, but I think he could stand to be more well-rounded. So Godby, Rookie, very close for me. Again, for mid lane, we have Godby number 1, Rookie number 2, Yu number 3, Pawn number 4, and number 5 is Join B. Now 80 carries. I've already said this on Twitter, how I would rate them for the season. I think it shuffled a little bit. So let's start with number 5. Number 5 is Name. Name, even though he's on the last place team, he just had games where he would just go completely insane. And this was much more like the beginning of the summer. He did this all the time, where he would just dumpster his lane. He would have good team fight pressure, and then they would lose because their compositions made 0 sense. Like the double assassin, no peel, 80 carry, it just, it was so bad. But then he kind of like flagged a little bit. He became much more average in his performances. It felt like he wasn't practicing or caring as much, and so for me, he fell from like the 4th best performing AD carry to the 5th. So that's where he is. Whereas Deft rose up. Deft is now the 4th best AD carry of the summer. This is actually really shocking to some people, and I think a lot of people rate Deft as a top 2 AD carry in LPL based on how well he did in the spring. So they kind of had that image in their mind, like how good this guy was at using cooldowns and summoners and all this stuff, but summer was really hard on Deft. He didn't do as well on some of the AD auto-attacking champions like Vayne or Caitlyn or Callista, but he would still, so he was like kind of limited to Corki in some ways and to Sivir to an extent. He didn't succeed very well in the fluctuating environment of his team. He would overcommit a lot of times, like overextend, and I think he's gone from this guy who was kind of wishy-washy on his commits to this guy who just like goes on so many different things, and it's not as good. I feel like him and Imp have kind of switched places where Imp was much more the UZI type. I'll go in and then all my team will peel for me. To Deft is a lot more like that now, which is really interesting to see. But again, of course, he's really, really great in team fights. He still does a ridiculous amount of damage, but it's just like the top three had better performances than him this summer. So this is going to be kind of the opposite of what I did with Flame and Koro, because I felt like in this instances, in the times where TNT played over UZI, TNT played worse. So for most of the split, like UZI and TNT, I think were really, really close. Both really, really good performances. TNT was a little bit less econ than UZI. UZI had the highest percentage of team gold of any player in the LPL during the time when he was playing. And he had a little bit more peel resources than TNT. The phenomenal thing for me about TNT is I feel like he's the AD carry in the league who has received the least amount of peel. But he's still done really well. He's been able to impact team fights from behind. He tends to not do as well in lane as he used to, and I think part of that is he just started playing less Sivir. Sivir was just doing so well for him for so long, so he doesn't do as well in lane, but regardless of how he does in lane, he still is really good and self-sufficient in team fighting and able to impact the team from behind. I think that Imp and TNT had the best qualities for a self-sufficient AD carry this split. It's just that like I would rate them subtly different in terms of I think TNT had better impact team fighting from behind. Like no one was able to position and use like their flash as well in terms of like getting maximizing this sort of damage. Whereas Imp, I think his positioning was just so much more fluid and on point. Like I think TNT got caught a little bit more, but he would use his flash to reposition, whereas I think Imp just didn't get caught. And also Imp did much better during the second half. I think TNT did a little bit better during the first half, where Imp just played stupid champions that didn't make sense because LGD was screwing around. Yeah. But number 2 is UZI. UZI had probably the most consistent split of his career. Unfortunately, he got benched, but every time he played, he looked pretty good. He still had these awkward Vayne games here and there, and he was still extremely high econ and required a lot of jungle pressure to get off the ground and carry. But he did look extremely, extremely good, and I think his positioning was a little bit more self-sufficient this time around, especially since he had fewer resources to go on. It's just really bad meta for AD carries, and he didn't clash well stylistically with the team at all, unfortunately, so he wasn't that well-rounded. And then number 1, we have Imp. Of course, it's Imp. Imp, extremely good self-position. So a lot of people will still have this memory of Imp on Samsung White in their minds, and he's not like that at all anymore. And by Samsung White, I don't mean when he first was playing for Ozone, and I think he had like a lot of really good solo carry performances, and he was really good at that time. Whereas Samsung White towards the end of the split, he would just kind of go in sometimes, and then Mata would just take care of him and all this other stuff, and all these rumors about he's not good without Mata. And he did come to this team where there is a really, really good support player, but he's much more self-sufficient. He's like the only AD carry I can think of who can 1v2 lanes and still win them. He plays Vayne extremely well in terms of self-sufficient peel and using the tumble to reposition. He's able to just kind of stand by himself and continue auto-attacking on Kog'Maw. I actually think Kog'Maw is his best champion right now, so Imp, I think, has just shown so much more well-roundedness throughout his entire career, and especially this year, than Deft has. So where you would think about them last year in terms of depth, self-sufficient positioning, impacting team fights from behind, doing really well. It's almost like they switched places. I don't know. It's really interesting. But yeah, Imp for me, hands down, best AD carry right now. So Imp, Guy, TNT, Deft, Name. And last, we come to the supports. Number 5 is Lei. So I think the top 4 AD carry supports in LPL are really, really clear, and they're really strong, and there's not much debate about who the top 4 are, but I think number 5 is a little bit more wiggle room, because you could actually vote 0 here, you could actually vote, there's probably someone else, but I completely space him. But Lei is my pick for number 5, because I think his wording, his kill participation, all those things on RNG were really, really underrated. I consider his peel, some of the things that he did with Whoosh, some of his roaming on the map and getting deep vision. Like, RNG actually had really, really good vision this year, and I contribute that a lot to Lei. Lei was just really good. I think he was extremely underrated. Unfortunately, being the best player on your team, when your team has like no strategy or anything like that, and you're a support, doesn't really work out for you. So Lei for me is number 5. I think he could have more playmaking potential for sure. He did play a large variety of champions, but I just felt like he was a little weak on the carry. Like, his positive performances didn't really necessarily translate into wins. Which, again, hard to rate supports by this, but I feel like there are supports on this list who legitimately had carry performances. Mako is number 4. I rate Mako lower than the top 3, primarily because he's not a shot caller. And I think the top 3 have so much control in their shot calling, which is really reflected in their games, that you can't discount that when you're talking about the support position, especially if your top 3 are just like the whole package. Mechanics, vision control, shot calling, team environment, everything else, then you can't give it to Mako if he doesn't shot call. Mako does, however, apparently dictate vision placement in the game, and his vision is really good. One thing I've noticed about him is he tends to ward like crazy when he's behind, and this is part of VDG's ability to come back so well. When they do come back, is just because the jungle is so well lit when they're down in gold. So for me, that's a really interesting aspect about Mako, and he's just mechanically very good. I think he's going to be incredibly good. He just doesn't have the control and all the facets that the other supports do. He also tends to be a little bit trigger happy on his engages. He will engage pretty accurately, but also pretty frequently, even when not necessarily the team is prepared. Mata is number 3. Mata, of course, his thing is the consistency factor, but he had really, really good performances towards the end, so he's going to be rated up a little bit higher. Plays all sorts of stuff. He legitimately had a lot of carry performances. Like, Mata straight up carried his team most of the time. This is unsurprising. It's Mata, right? So, just for me, it's the consistency factor. Sometimes he tilts really hard, but really, really great peaks, huge carry factor, very well-rounded, amazing shot calling, as always. You can hear in the comms, he just goes crazy and screams all the time. So, yeah, Mata number 3. Number 2 is probably a little bit surprising, because I do rate PYL very highly, and I think in terms of whole package, PYL is extremely good. Very good mechanically, very good micromanagement, very good at terms of bringing talent to the team. Glad he's going to Worlds. Extremely good shot calling. He apparently also creates like a very positive environment within the team, just because he's an approachable mediator type voice. So great leadership, all these other qualities, extremely good mechanics. The thing for me that separates him from Heart is just the level of control that Heart, as the number 1 support for me, has. Heart was also good the entire time. I feel like PYL had a slow start, so unfortunately, given how good Heart was the entire split, I have to count that against PYL. Heart, when you watch him, it's almost like his teammates die when he's not around because he's not like watching them, giving them instructions. some teams just straight banned all supports against him because he's so good, and why not? He just I don't know, just Hart was so good, and it's so surprising to me, like the connotation with age and all this other stuff, and how I feel like Hart this year surpassed Mata, just because of how dedicated he is to like the game and playing, and how strong his individual performances were. Like his synergy with Long was very good, just extremely powerful player. That even though the team ended up getting relegated, I can't consider giving another support number one in his position, just because I think he was definitively the best. So, I mean, I think people do debate this and don't agree with me, but I think if you watch his games, his performances are very convincing. Also, extremely smart in his shot calling. A lot of the theory and a lot of the execution was good. It's just that some of the mechanical inconsistencies of his teammates made it crash and burn at times. So if you've been paying attention for this somewhat long video, I will give you my all-star team. Top, Koro 1, EDG from EDG. Jungle, Clear Love from EDG. Mid lane, Godby from LGD. AD carry, Imp from LGD. And support is Hart from Unlimited Potential. So the interesting thing is that I have a Korean bottom lane and Chinese players and the rest. And the other interesting thing is that I think if you asked anyone last year about the Samsung White bottom lanes, they'd say Mata is definitely the better support and Deft is probably the better AD carry. So I think it's interesting that for me this year they've definitely swapped places. And that's about all I have. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please subscribe to Chinese All Broadcasting channel. Please consider following me on Twitter at KARONMOSER. I'll probably also come out with an article about Chaogu this week, so look out for that on the Score Esports. Thank you. Someone who's really good in all those areas, but then they're on like an 8th place team versus a 2nd place team. You have to give it to the 2nd place team player, unfortunately, for that guy. So let's start with the top lane. Top lane was actually really complicated for me because I actually saw an instance where we had a clear top 3, but those top 3 were really hard to sort between. And then after that we had, I guess, kind of a clear 4th place, I think. And then there was like a question mark between the 5th and 6th place. So first of all, I'm going to start with the 5th place and explain why I picked Invictus Gaming's Zatai. So the reason why I picked Invictus Gaming's Zatai is because I think that he's really high up on the carry factor, because I felt like for a lot of this summer season, Invictus Gaming's Rookie and Cacao, especially in the second half, which I'm going to rate more highly because I actually have done player rankings for the first half, so it makes more sense to more heavily weight the second half for this video. I'm going to give 5th place to Zatai because when Cacao and Rookie just felt like they didn't care overall, they played really passively, they just sort of farmed and they just let the enemy team like take all these advantages for free. I felt like Zatai always tried to have some sort of impact, and he was always really trying to pull pressure in his lane, and I felt like he ended up being a very high pressure type player, kind of akin to like Insect on KCB or, you know, Darien on Moscow 5. You know, Zatai had that style, and eventually, again, it's kind of similar. It's just that they're able to more often than not have a positive impact on the game and not have a negative impact on the game. They don't have like there's not a case where they have these really high highs and then these really abysmal lows. I don't tend to value those types of players as much. The next criteria that I look at is, of course, like the carry, right? How many times can you look at a player's individual performance and say, you know, they won the game off that? I think that's actually really rare at a certain level where a team player is really high up. So this isn't going to be something that is going to happen very often. And of course, last of all, like the sort of results you have, like the numbers you put up, how well your team did. I use this as like sort of the last baseline. So if you have going to look at that and say like holistically that player is really bad, I might rank them like down a bit if it's really close, and a lot of these are really close, so maybe that matters, but I don't think it's going to matter, and I don't think we're going to have a situation where I do pick a player and they go 0-15 every single game they play. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and give you the criteria first of all. One thing that I value really highly is well-roundedness. I actually find that well-roundedness of a player, I tend to value it more than other people, more than some of my peers, because if I look at a player who only plays like carry champions and carries every game, but then plays tanks in an instance where maybe he has another player on his team who can carry really well, and is more suited to that role, and so he plays tanks and then he just feeds relentlessly or doesn't do as well, then I will tend to rate that player lower. Consistent PTL just did their all pro team, which is effectively an all-star team where they pick the best player in each role or the most impactful, or I honestly don't really know what their criteria is. This is something that I actually get a lot of questions for, so I'm going to do it for LPL. I might do something similar written wise for EULCS just because I've done that before. But I really wanted to be able to hash out in a more conversational way how I rank players and why I rank them a certain way, especially in relation to LPL, because this is what I talk about more often. I'm going to do it now. I feel pretty safe doing it before finals, because even if finals happens and one of the players that I pick as best in their role just goes 0-15 every single game, I don't expect it to go 5 games if there's a player going 0-15, but let's say for 5 games, then I'm not